Hello, everyone. Welcome to a press conference with Niki, Ashton, NDP National Revenue Critic, Davies, NDP Health Critic, advocates for international vaccine access, and the Bolivian Minister of Foreign Trade and Integration, Benjamin Blanco. Please note that this press conference will be delivered in English, French, and Spanish. Please use the interpretation menu at the bottom of your page to select your preferred interpretation. And you will hear the speaker or the interpretation in that language. We recommend that you do not mute the background audio, as there can be a brief lag between the interpretation and the speaker's sound if it switches to your language. If you are comfortable in more than one language, you can switch between interpretation or your interpretation of choice or the original audio through the same menu. Alors, vous êtes bien à la conférence de presse avec la porte-parole pour le revenu et la porte-parole pour le revenu national, Niki Ashton, ainsi que le porte-parole pour la santé du NPD, Davies, des intervenantes et intervenants pour l'accès aux vaccins à l'échelle internationale, ainsi que le ministre bolivien du Commerce extérieur et de l'Intégration, M. Benjamin Blanco. Veuillez noter que cette conférence de presse sera donnée en anglais, français et espagnol. Au bas de votre écran, vous trouverez le menu d'interprétation. Veuillez utiliser ce menu au bas de la page pour sélectionner la langue de votre choix. Nous vous recommandons de ne pas mettre l'audio original en sourdine puisqu'il peut y avoir un délai entre l'interprétation et le son de l'orateur alors que la langue change. Si vous êtes à l'aise dans plus d'une langue, vous pouvez alterner entre l'interprétation de votre choix et le son original au sein du même menu. Donc, je vais donner la parole maintenant à Niki qui va juste nous traduire les instructions en espagnol.
Quería decir que en la parte inferior de su pantalla encontrará el menú de interpretación. Puede seleccionar el idioma que prefiera, inglés, francés o español. Escuchará al intérprete del idioma que escogió. La interpretación en los 3 idiomas es ofrecido como parte de esta conferencia de prensa. Les recomendamos que no silencien el audio de fondo porque podría haber un breve lapso entre la interpretación y el sonido de la persona que habla si cambia su idioma. Si se siente...
en sordine, il pourrait avoir un changement entre les langues de l'orateur. Si vous êtes confortable en plus de langues, vous pouvez changer entre l'audio original et une deuxième langue.
Merci, Niki.
Good afternoon. My name is Niki Ashton. I'm the NDP MP for Churchill, Kuwait, Nukiski, and I am pleased to host this press conference with my NDP colleague and our health critic, Don Davies, the MP for Vancouver Kingsway. Today's press conference marks the first time during the COVID-19 pandemic that a Canadian drug manufacturer, BioLease, and a country in the global south, Bolivia, are reaching out jointly to Canadian media on Parliament Hill calling for action from our government. We stand with them and with Canadians sharing a clear message. Our message today is that Canada must ensure that BioLease, a Canadian drug manufacturer based in St. Catharines, Ontario, can produce life-saving COVID-19 vaccines ordered and paid for by Bolivia. This means that Canada must grant the compulsory license that would enable this production to take place. Let's be clear, these vaccines will save lives. These vaccines will slow down the global spread of COVID-19. Today, you will hear from Vice Minister Blanco from Bolivia. You will hear from BioLease Representative John Fulton. You will hear from leading global voices on vaccine equity, KEI, and Luis Gil Abinader. And from the Council of Canadians, who along with other Canadian-based networks and advocacy organizations are clear. Canadians expect better from their government. Canada needs to drop the facade on the world stage that we are being benevolent when it comes to vaccines. The government of Canada is choosing to side with big pharmaceutical companies instead of finding ways to make vaccines available to the global south by producing them here in Canada. This deal between BioLease and Bolivia is good for the people of Bolivia. It is good for Canadian workers and communities. It is good for our world. It's time for Canada to act. And I'd now like to pass the mic on to my colleague, Don Davies.
Well, thank you very much, Niki, and to all of our distinguished panelists at this news conference. It's a privilege to join you here today as we join together in calling for something that not only is a matter of fundamental equity, but one of profound public health. When it comes to COVID-19, one thing is clear. Until everyone is safe, no one is safe. Yet, of the almost 7 billion COVID-19 vaccine doses that have been administered globally to date, just 3% have gone to people in lower income countries. Numerous countries still haven't received enough doses even to vaccinate their frontline healthcare workers. Inequitable global vaccine distribution will needlessly prolong the COVID-19 pandemic and risks incubating dangerous new variants of the virus in unvaccinated populations everywhere. That means that people will needlessly get sick and die. The OECD estimates that the global economy also stands to lose as much as $9.2 trillion if governments fail to ensure that developing economies' access to COVID-19 vaccines is there. As much as half of that would fall on advanced economies as well. It's important to remember that COVID-19 vaccine research and development was primarily financed in large part through public investment. Intellectual property constraints cannot be justified in those circumstances or in a time of crisis. Instead of defending the interests of the pharmaceutical industry, the Government of Canada must start working collaboratively with other countries to dismantle vaccine production barriers as rapidly as possible. We have recently called on the Government of Canada to support the request of many countries such as India to waive the TRIPS barriers that are preventing countries from having access to the intellectual property and technology necessary to produce COVID vaccines. Today, I call on my colleagues and the people on this press conference to call on the Government of Canada to approve the request of BioLease Pharma to produce vaccines destined for Bolivia. This is not only a matter of basic equity, it's one of sound public health, not only to the people of Bolivia, but also to the people of Canada, because once again, no one is safe until everyone is safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. And next we will hear from Vice Minister Blanco from Bolivia.
Muchas gracias, muy buenas tardes a los diputados, a Niki Ashton, a Don Davies, al presidente de
Peace and the president of BioNiagara, Mr. John Fulton, the lead chief researcher Luis Hill, in charge of privatization and trade, Nicholas Berry-Shaw, and the media and all, both from Canada and Bolivia, and all those who are listening at this press conference. As you know, the pandemic has generated in 2019 by COVID has left a desolated scenario in the world. We have an imminent health, social, and economic crisis across the world. This invites us to reflect on the actions of the human beings within their societies. According to the international standards, in order to get out of this crisis, it's necessary to reach an optimal level of immunization worldwide. It means that 70% of the vaccinated people with a complete scheme. But powerful countries, especially those pharmaceutical companies, they are not willing to accelerate to reach this goal. So unfortunately, setting the precedent that the vaccine has only been a tool to satisfy their economic interest. for some transnational companies. This is why Bolivia, based on its experience in the process of acquiring the vaccines for the country, has proposed two actions as alternatives to allow the access regarding the TRIPS or the TRIPS intellectual property right. One, the liberalization of patents. Bolivia has joined with India and South Africa to exempt certain provisions of the TRIPS through the health emergency reserve, and this would allow that all the countries do not have to comply with this protection for intellectual property during the time of pandemic until a widespread vaccination is achieved. The TRIPS within the WTO has the support of dozens of countries, hundreds of civil organizations. However, in some developed countries, they hinder this possibility, arguing that the existing mechanisms in the WTO are enough. They mean the compulsory licenses that, as we're going to see for the case of Bolivia, it's shown that this mechanism has failed. The second point of action that we are applying is to find a mission of voluntary and mandatory authorizations. It's been a difficult negotiation. We don't see that within the WTO there's going to be any progress. So Bolivia has used the existing mechanisms in order to obtain an exemption of the patent at this point. So Bolivia proposed to use the flexibility of compulsory licenses according to Article 31 and 31 bis of the about protection of patents. One of them is the compulsory license, that are authorizations granted by a government to use a patented invention without the consent of the patent holder. These mechanisms have been created for moments of crisis like this one. It has generated by the pandemic. However, for several months, we've been unable to get it. Article 31 allows conditions to issue such licenses and requires for the applicants to try to negotiate first within commercial terms a voluntary license with the holder of the patent. But if this path gets no results, then something that we're looking at today, then mandatory compulsory license can be issued. In Bolivia has contact with K, an organization that has offices in Washington and Geneva, and KEI cooperates with BioLease Pharma that can manufacture about 20 million vaccines against COVID-19 per year. Specifically, Bolivia signed a contract with BioLease Pharma with 15 million of Johnson & Johnson single-dose vaccine, provided that a compulsory license is obtained. That would allow to reach 15 million people with a scheme with a full vaccination of a budget of $3 and $4. Subsequently, Bolivia initiated a compulsory license process, notifying its use as an important country. Has requested that Canada, in accordance to its legislation, notifies its intention in order to be a big exporting country, since BioLease Pharma is settled in Canada, and this creates the will of Canada in order to allow these compulsory licenses and make them effective. In May, there was a contract signed between Bolivia and BioLease, and that opportunity, Anthony Topman, director of the Intellectual Property Division of the World Trade Organization, indicated this step provides a practical response that could be a broader process in which countries identify urgent and unmet needs and encourage a combined and coordinated response from international partners. However, as today, we see that Bolivia has a failed experience since it depends on the will of a third party, because Canada hasn't had this So the experience of Bolivia has failed since because they have applied existing mechanisms, but we have not achieved this compulsory licensing. But if we got it, then we would have the chance for Bolivia to get this vaccine, but as well the other countries that they don't have a vaccine yet, they could get it too without a patent. As time elapses, we are increasing the more lives are lost, more with the fourth wave, where many countries in the world are being hit hard, especially those developing countries, the countries less developed. And this mechanism depends on the will of a third party that in this case has not demonstrated any interest in applying this mechanism. Therefore, the interpreter lost the audio. Interpreter lost the audio. The interpreter has no audio. Okay.
Monsieur le ministre, vous êtes sur mute. Ah, OK, parfait. C'est revenu maintenant. Merci. Thank you.
Okay. Mil disculpas. Bueno, decía de que...
Well, I was saying that the experience of Bolivia shows that it's required of the will of a third party that has not demonstrated any interest in applying this mechanism or process. Therefore, the international standards are not responding to the needs and the emergency that our peoples are facing. They don't come in a timely fashion. Since May up till now, we've been unable to get a response, which means that the countries, especially those less developed countries, are still, many people are dying because of this, the lack of this political will. I'd like to wrap up thanking for this space to make our call to reach authorities to assume the responsibility and bring the opportunity to reach this goal in order to get a greater vaccination. What happens that if in a key position, it shows that this demonstrates a failure of these many organizations and their purpose. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Ministro Blanco. Y ahora, now we will turn to the next speaker, who is the BioLease representative, John Fulton.
Thank you, Nikki. Appreciate the invite today. And my name is John Fulton. I'm the president of BioNagra and also the spokesperson for BioLease Pharma Corporation based in St. Catharines. In March of 2020, during the early days of the pandemic, the government of Canada amended the Patent Act, allowing Canadian manufacturers to produce pretty much anything related, any kind of health technology related to COVID-19. They allowed Canadian companies to produce any patented drug, diagnostic, device, medicine. They quickly amended the act in a blink of an eye. It was, I believe, at one cabinet meeting, within 24 hours, they amended the Patent Act. And in 2005, during the bird flu crisis, I attempted to do the same thing using Canada's access to medicines regime. We attempted to ask our government to amend the Patent Act to add Tamiflu, the generic oseltamivir, to the list of drugs for export to low and middle income countries. That process took 7 months, after which the bird flu H5N1 virus had waned. Therefore, we didn't scale our production. Let's bring this up to date. This is a very technical topic. It's discussing the Patent Act and discussing Schedule 1, the TRIPS waiver, the patent waiver. These are all complex subjects for the general public. I'm going to bring us up to 2021. Over the last 8 months, I've been trying to get the government of Canada just to start the conversation around amending the Patent Act to add COVID-19 vaccines and related technologies for low and middle income countries. So the contrast here is in one cabinet meeting, the Canadian government amended the act for Canadians, but they're not willing to do this for low and middle income countries. And this is to me, it's a shame. And if you look at the U.S. right now, President Biden has supporting the waiving intellectual property for the production of vaccines. And here in Canada, we're still waiting just to open a dialogue, to get the conversation started. I've been knocking at the Justin Trudeau government's door for 8 months now, and no one will give me a straight answer on how to trigger this process. And that's my.
Thank you very much, John. And now we will turn to a leading global voice on vaccine equity from KEI, Luis Gil Abinader.
Thank you, MP Ashton. So we are witnessing a disconnect between the message that Canada has been delivering to the international community and the actions of its own government at home. So at the World Trade Organization, Canada has been claiming that their access to medicine regime works, quote unquote, as intended. Canada has also been saying that this mechanism is the type of approach that should be used to address intellectual property barriers during the pandemic. Yet Canada refuses to take the steps required to trigger the access to medicine regime in the context of COVID-19. In particular, Canada refuses to add COVID-19 to Schedule 1 of the Patent Act. By doing that, Canada is blocking the use of compulsory licenses to save lives in Bolivia. The way we see it, that is a remarkable act of hypocrisy. As Young just mentioned, just shortly before COVID-19 was declared a pandemic, Canada, shortly after COVID-19 was declared a pandemic, Canada amended its patent law to facilitate the grant of compulsory licenses to supply its own market and to protect its own citizens. What we're calling for here today is for Canada to act with an urgency similar to the one it used last year when it amended the Patent Act to protect Canadians, because saving lives in Bolivia is just as important as it is to save lives in Canada. I want to conclude by thanking MP Ashton and MP Davies and Vice Minister Blanco for your leadership on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis. And next we will turn to Nicolas.
My name got cut off. My name is Nicholas Barry Shaw. I'm the campaigner on trade and privatization with the Council of Canadians. And I'm really glad that this press conference has been organized. Many thanks to Niki Ashton's team for helping organize it, and for all the speakers who have spoken so far. I would just start by saying that the pandemic has taught us many things. But one of the things that it's really shown is, unfortunately, the global South can't depend on the generosity of wealthy countries like Canada or the benevolence of big pharma to ensure that they have access to life-saving medicines. Since the vaccines became readily available in December 2020, the profiteering of the vaccine producers and the hoarding of doses by rich countries has meant that low-income countries have received only a tiny fraction of what they need to vaccinate their populations. The distribution of doses is so lopsided that the WHO calls it vaccine apartheid. Now, the problem is not manufacturing capacity. The manufacturing capacity is there to fix this situation if we can mobilize it. BioLize Pharma is just one of many plants around the world that could be used to diversify the supply of vaccines and make vaccines affordable and available to low-income countries. What's lacking, as Minister Blanco underlined, is the political will to take on big pharma. And unfortunately, for over a year now, that political will has been lacking in Canada. The Council of Canadians has analyzed the lobbying records of these corporations, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, Innovative Medicines Canada, and we found that there has been a huge increase in lobbying by Big Pharma's lobbyists in Ottawa in the year since the proposal to temporarily waive patents on vaccines was made in October 2020. Over the past year, these lobbyists for Big Pharma have met with the Trudeau government 181 times. And this works out to an average of 3 to 4 meetings per week. Now, prior to the pandemic, the Trudeau government would, the lobbyists for Big Pharma would complain that the Trudeau government had a rather chilly relationship with them. And I think what we see in the lobbying records is that this relationship has warmed up considerably. One of the consequences of that is that Canada has been basically carrying water for Big Pharma at the WTO, and it has been blocking BioLease from completing this contract that it signed with the Bolivian government to produce a generic vaccine. Canada's refusal to act on the request of the Bolivian government to amend the Patent Act is not only morally reprehensible, it's also dangerously short-sighted, epidemiologically speaking. So that's why the Council of Canadians, along with our allies, has launched a petition calling for the Trudeau government to get rid of this red tape, to facilitate the production of generic vaccines in Canada, and to support the temporary suspension of patents on COVID-19 vaccines and other life-saving medicines at the WTO. So with the help of our allies, we're hoping to build a grassroots response to Big Pharma's undue influence over our trade and vaccine policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nicholas, and thank you to all of our very powerful speakers here today. You've heard clearly the message here today that we here in Canada, our government has the responsibility to act and to act urgently. Canada needs to stop the hypocrisy on the world stage. Solutions, including solutions here at home, are at our fingertips. And finally, as we all know, this is about saving lives and putting an end to a global pandemic that affects all of us. We welcome your questions and further discussion.
Thank you very much. So now we will invite members of the media. So I would like to invite only members of the media who have joined us today to ask a question and a follow-up. To ask a question, please use the raise hand function at the bottom of your page. There's either a raise hand function or a small menu called reactions where you can click and put your hand up. And when I call on you to ask your question, you can unmute yourself to ask your question to the speaker of your choosing. Alors, j'aimerais ça inviter les membres des médias et uniquement les membres des médias qui sont avec nous aujourd'hui pour poser vos questions. Alors, ça sera une question de suivi. Veuillez utiliser la fonction « Lever la main » qui est au bas de la page sous le menu « Réaction ». Et puis, lorsque je vais vous appeler, vous pouvez vous enlever sur sourdine pour poser votre question. So we have a question from David Thurton with the CBC. Please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for holding this press conference and doing it in so many languages. I'm just wondering if this question is to the Bolivian foreign minister. I'm wondering, it's just so rare for a diplomat, a high-ranking government official from another country to hold a press conference with an opposition party in Canada and to be so critical of the government. So I'm wondering if you can tell us, what's to say about how frustrated or how serious or how acute the situation is in Bolivia, and maybe what are you hoping that the New Democrats will be able to do to help fix the situation, applying their pressure in Parliament to effect change?
Bueno, me permito contestar.
Well, I allow myself to answer this question. This is a press conference. We we're carrying out, or we're participating not only with the MPs who have kindly supported us to have this space, but also with the companies themselves with whom we have signed an agreement like BioLice and with KEI, who have helped us to find a company who's capable of producing the vaccines that are required. The position of Bolivia about the topic of the vaccines is that there should be a global asset available to all the countries, regardless whether people live in a developed or a developing country. It's part of the foreign policy of Bolivia to defend life. And this is why we are here present in this conference in order to get our voice to be heard and to make the right to life of all people to prevail above the interest of the transnational companies have. Thank you very much.
I'll just ask a quick follow-up if I may, and maybe I'll direct this to Ms. Ashton. What pressure is the NDP gonna place on the government? How are you gonna use the tools of parliament that you have at your disposal to change what we're doing? And I also just wonder, is it time to be using more stronger language, like, you know, not to sound incendiary or alarmist, but does Canada literally have blood on its hands?
Well, first of all, I want to start off by making it clear that Bolivia and BioLice have been working at this for months, since March, in fact. This is many months of efforts to meet with representatives of the government of Canada, meet with diplomats, and realize an agreement between you know, a customer in the global south and a Canadian drug manufacturer. The fact that the government of Canada, in the middle of a pandemic, chooses to continue to pretend that it is, you know, benevolent on the world stage and wanting to help deal with this COVID-19 crisis, but doing the opposite here at home, you know, needs to be exposed, frankly, and we need to see change, right? This is we know this is the longer we fail to vaccinate folks and make vaccines available, the longer we will be dealing with COVID-19. So what we're saying here today is that it's time for the government of Canada to stop the hypocrisy, to stop the facade on the world stage, and to allow for this deal between a Canadian company and a country of the global south that is willing and prepared to pay for vaccines to go forward. We are certainly hoping that the newly minted ministers, Minister Duclos and Minister Ng, along with the Prime Minister himself, will look into this matter immediately. We'll choose to deal bilaterally with Bolivia in a respectful manner, and other countries as well that are wishing to find solutions to access vaccines, and to work as well to support a Canadian drug manufacturer. I mean, it is truly shocking that in the middle of a pandemic, we continue to see our Canadian government cheerlead for big pharma instead of finding solutions that include solutions led by Canadian companies, you know, that employ Canadians here on the ground, that would benefit Canadian industry and Canadian communities. You know, this is an opportunity. This is a win-win all around, and it's deeply needed during this at this time. You know, in an urgent fashion. You know, we need to see Canada change course, and I look forward to working with our team, Don Davies and our entire team, in pushing for Canada to act, to value life, and to value and to truly show leadership when it comes to making vaccines available on the world stage.
Thank you very much. Just before I go to the next question, I just want to remind folks, members of the media, if you would like to ask a question, to please use the raise hand function at the bottom of the page. J'aimerais juste faire un rappel aux membres des médias. Si vous aimeriez poser vos questions, je vous inviterai d'utiliser la fonction « Lever la main » au bas de la page pour poser votre question et questions de suivi. Next, I have Laura Osman with the Canadian Press. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Nina. I don't mean to sound insensitive with this question because I'm genuinely interested to hear what you have to say. Perhaps this is best directed at the MPs. I can imagine that the government is nervous about going out on a limb and being the only country to sort of use this flexibility to waive intellectual property rights, which could anger some of the companies whose innovation we're counting on domestically in this pandemic. Do you have any concern that while we're still relying on doses from these pharmaceutical companies, that this move could have an adverse effect on Canada's own vaccine rollout?
Maybe I'll answer that, Nikki, if that's okay. Well, first of all, I think that's called leadership. We are in extraordinary times right now. I mean, let's face it, this happens once every 100 years where we have such a serious, significant, widespread global pandemic. And I think the normal rules of business that are meant to govern the production of goods and services in normal regular times ought to be examined very carefully and measured as to whether or not they're appropriately applied in such an extraordinary time as this. You know, we in the NDP, and I think responsible leaders all over the world believe in ordered, regulated trade rules for everybody. But there are certain times and I think imperatives that trump that. And I think the health of the global population, where life is literally on the hanging in the balance, is one of those. So we're talking about a responsible, judicious, sensible, targeted relaxation of patent rules for the purpose of facilitating the production of life-saving vaccines. That's what we're talking about here. And I think that's not only a responsible position, I think it's the only ethical, and frankly, it's the only pragmatic decision. I don't know how many times we have to emphasize that this virus does not know borders. What happens in Bolivia, what happens in Canada, what happens in Africa, what happens in Europe or Asia affects us all. And we all have if not a moral interest, we have a self-interest in making sure that every human being is vaccinated as quickly as possible. And to slavishly apply corporate rules and use those, allow them to be used as barriers that are palpably and demonstrably working to prevent the vaccination of humans in a time of death-causing pandemic is, I think, unjustifiable. And so to me, the only responsible position of any political leader anywhere would be to do everything possible to facilitate the production, the distribution, and the vaccination of citizens, no matter where they live on this planet. And as we approach the 2-year mark since the SARS-CoV-2 virus emerged on the global stage, I think that the world leaders have had more than enough time to understand the issues and to make those changes. And I think what's very, very regrettable is we're seeing leaders around the world, including our own government here, the government of Justin Trudeau, who appear to be not willing to take on pharmaceutical industry interests, even when that puts the health of Canadians and citizens at risk. I'm going to end by emphasizing again, as significant, in fact, in some cases, in some cases, all of the investment that went into the research and development of these vaccines was paid for by the public. This is not a case where you had pharmaceutical companies who risked their capital and spent years in development and have a strong case for private manipulation or monopolization of profit to dominate in this case here. I think Moderna is a case where 100% of the R&D was paid for by the public. I know that Pfizer's German partner got, I think it was $500 million. So the public has paid for these vaccines. I think the public should get the benefit of it. So and by the way, I think that the Canadian public and the citizens of countries around the world would agree with this position.
Thank you so much, Don. I also had a question for John. I was wondering, once you get this approval, if it eventually comes in, what are the steps that follow, and how long would it take to actually be able to start producing and exporting some vaccine?
Thank you, Laura. First of all, adding COVID-19 vaccines to Schedule 1 of the Patent Act is the first step that will allow us to move on to requesting a compulsory license. So as far as I know, the only requirement to adding a drug to Schedule 1 of the Patent Act is that it be a patented drug. In 2003, when Canada's access to medicines regime came into force, there was already 45 drugs on the list of drugs. And I don't believe there were any generic manufacturers of drugs set up to produce any of those drugs. So what we're doing now is we're asking that COVID-19 vaccines as a category and related health technologies be added to this list. Once they're on the list, then we can look at the investment in fully setting up manufacturing, look at tech transfer, look at the funding. But until then, until the COVID-19 vaccines are on that list, we run the risk of this investment without the opportunity to be able to get a compulsory license. Now, to answer your question, how long this would take, I'd like to go back to April 2020 when Biolese Pharma, which just so you know, is one of 3 companies that we know of in Canada that is a industrial level GMP, GLP, sterile fill injectable drug manufacturer. It's a big facility. It's 125,000 square feet. They currently produce injectable cancer drugs that they're shipped all over the world. Many of their customers are in low-income countries. So Biolese, early in the pandemic, was contacted by Deloitte on behalf of the Canadian government to investigate whether or not they could produce vaccines for the pandemic. And what Deloitte discovered was that Biolese was 4 years into building a facility to produce biologics. All the bioreactors, the fill lines, the laboratories, the air handling systems, the water systems were all on site or in place. And they actually thought they struck gold. There was a facility that existed here and was in the process of scaling to produce biologics, or in this case, biosimilars. And so again, to answer your question, we're looking at 4 to 6 months to finish scaling and to get into production. Now, that being said, let's just say we did receive a compulsory license to produce the J&J vaccine. We would need some collaboration from J&J to make this happen in a time that is really relative to the crisis at hand. Because in Canada, biosimilars, let's just say that the biosimilar being the generic version of a biologic drug, they're treated as new drugs compared to, say, let's say the current drugs that the company's making. If they produce a generic copy of a patented drug, then there's only the bioequivalency that they have to establish. Whereas with a generic vaccine or generic biosimilar, you have to go through clinical trials. Now, to avoid clinical trials, you would have to be working very closely with the patent holder, in this case, J&J. And that's really what we look forward to is that collaboration that would allow us to produce these vaccines very quickly and address the agreement we have with Bolivia.
Sorry, can I just clarify, if you get the compulsory license, does J&J have to cooperate with you?
A compulsory license is really only a device that protects you from litigation. It doesn't force tech transfer. It doesn't force the sharing of cell lines or knowledge or tricks of the trade. It basically protects us from being sued. If you go back to 2005, when during the bird flu crisis, we got Tamiflu, or also Tamiflu, the generic name, on the list of drugs. They amended the Patent Act, added it to the list of drugs. In the meantime, we had reverse engineered Tamiflu. One of the big issues around making Tamiflu was having the reagents or the biomass to produce the API. We actually figured out a way to extract shikimic acid, the main ingredient, from pine trees. So we secured the biomass. We reverse engineered it. Now, keep in mind, we didn't produce any of that data for the government of Canada at that time. All we did was, through our member of parliament, ask that Tamiflu be added to the list of drugs, and the process started. Now, 8 months into the process this time around, I started asking March 2021. Actually, I called the main number on the Canada's Access to Medicines website, Canada's Access to Medicines regime's website, and it was disconnected. It remains disconnected. Then I went to the list of drugs on Schedule 1 to see if it had already been amended for COVID-19 vaccines, and the link was broken. So to this day, right here and now, if you go to the camera website, the main phone number is disconnected, and the links to these scheduled list of drugs is not found. So I find that abhorrent that the website has gone dormant, and we're as a group here today, we're trying to resurrect this program, trying to get Canada's Access to Medicines regime back on its feet and put it to use. This is what it's for. If we can't use CAMR, we can't use compulsory licensing for a worldwide pandemic that's killing millions of people, then what's the use? And really, to quote a representative from MSF that I had a meeting with, she said that if we can't get a compulsory licensing system running during a pandemic, we can't get compulsory licenses issued, we don't have any hope for global warming. We're putting the lives of marginalized peoples in low-income parts of the world, low and middle-income areas of the world, at risk by not allowing companies like BioLease or like Incepta in Bangladesh. I've been in touch with the president of Incepta in Bangladesh. He has 20,000 people working for him, and his equipment's sitting idle. There's Teva, there's Northern Biotech, there's 4 companies right there that are ready to start producing COVID-19 vaccines, and there's many, many more on the sidelines that would volunteer to produce if the optics changed. If the WTO members get a consensus and acknowledge that we have a problem, the resistance that we're getting from the Trudeau government would push through. They start a conversation. I'm really only looking to start a conversation. If I go to Health Canada, they're very forthcoming. It's just you have to speak to Industry Canada, or ISED, Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada, and get on Schedule 1. You can't talk to us until you're on Schedule 1. If you talk to ISED, they direct you back to Health Canada. So it's a classic catch-22.
Thank you very much. So we're just going to go to our last question. I have Camille from Quebec. Please go ahead with one question, one follow-up. Thank you.
Hello, how are you? Well, my name is Camille Strachnoy. I'm from TELAM, the National News Agency of Argentina. First of all, thank you for organizing this press conference, which I think it's very important because it shows that this pandemic is far from over, especially here in the global south. If it's okay with you, like this is an international matter, I will speak in Spanish, considering also that we have a translator. So my questions, there are only two questions that I have. One is for una pregunta es para Niki Ashton. I will start speaking in Spanish. Una pregunta es para Niki Ashton y otra es para el viceministro Blanco. Sabemos que hasta ahora Biolis no obtuvo nada más que silencio del gobierno de Canadá en su pedido para incluir las vacunas al Schedule 1. En ese sentido, mi pregunta es para Niki Ashton es, ¿qué le responden los miembros del oficialismo, del Parlamento del oficialismo, ante sus demandas de alguna respuesta? Y consultarle también al embajador, al viceministro Blanco, ¿qué le dice el embajador de Canadá en Bolivia o con las autoridades que haya hablado? Teniendo en cuenta que, como lo señaló Luis Gil Abinader, este accionar del gobierno de Canadá, en este caso en particular, se contradice con su posición en la Organización Mundial del Comercio, donde no apoya el TRIPS waiver, sino que la contrapropuesta, digamos, que prioriza justamente mantener las actuales previsiones de licencias obligatorias. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Camille. I will answer in English, even though I understood your question. First, I want to say to your introduction, it is absolutely shameful that Canada is not moving on this life and death matter of producing vaccines to assist the global South. The production of which would benefit here our own country. So this is, and this is months in the making. It is time for Canada to act. As I mentioned earlier, we finally know what our cabinet will look like. We know that we have a new Minister of Health, a new Minister of Industry, and they were announced just a few days ago. So what we are saying today, we are appealing to them. We are also appealing to Prime Minister Trudeau and calling on them to act, to grant this compulsory license, to allow for this agreement between Biolis and Bolivia to become reality. I look forward to working with our team, Don Davies, my colleague, and our team in Parliament as it reopens at the end of this month and beyond to push Canada to act. We've seen our Prime Minister talk a good talk on the world stage, but the reality is that Canada is part of the problem, both at the international level and here at home, not allowing a deal like this to go forward. There is no good reason for this to take place. We've seen Canada take the side of big pharmaceutical companies. Look, the bottom line here is saving lives. What we need to do is allow for Canada to be part of the solution, and in dealing with the global 19 pandemic, whether it's here or the global South or around the world, and allowing for this agreement to go forward is that solution. We are calling on Canada to act today, now.
Do you have a follow-up?
Para contestar la pregunta que nos hacía el compañero.
That the journalist about the relationship we've had with the embassy, with the government of Canada since the very beginning, since March and April, when we signed the agreement. We've been having meetings in Bolivia. We don't have an embassy of Canada. The embassy that looks after Bolivia is in Peru, but we've had some video conferences, and we've also requested officially through the diplomatic routes, but the only answer is that the subject is being analyzed, and when they get a response, and we will be informed. So far, and for several months, we've received no response at all.
Camille, do you have a follow-up?
No, thank you so much both for the answer. Muchas gracias a los dos por sus respuestas.
Excellent. We have time for one last question. If we can go to Christian Rojas, if you can tell us from what media you are, we have the time for one more question.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon.
Please go ahead. You can ask your question. All right, I think we have some technical difficulties, so I believe that this will have to conclude our press conference. Ceci mettra fin à notre conférence de presse. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Bonne journée. Have a good day.